Authors Press.
Hello everyone, my name is Nicole Richardson and I'm from Authors Press. Today is September 9th, 2022. Welcome to another fantastic virtual interview where I'm gathered here today with Cherie Doyen, the author of the Chronicles of Tigua. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Cherie?
Yeah, I'm 61, I have 2 daughters, 3 grandchildren, and 2 puppy dogs. I love animals. I started writing in 2013, and the evolution of that is the Chronicles of Tigua, which is based on my experience as a highly sensitive empath living in a very chaotic, complex world, right? And our environment, more likely, And, what does a kid do with that? And I think that, it became very important to me as I was coming through to give the world a different lens, right, for these children. And, to realize that we do remember. And it does affect life in a very complex way. And at the end of it, we're standing there trying to get through each day. I think one of the things for myself was, that things were compartmentalized as people were hearing them, but the idea that complexity was happening every day was unseen by most. So as I was writing this book, it became very important for myself to get that somehow on the page, right? So that that complexity of thought and the brilliance of these kids truly maneuvering that every day is celebrated.
I know you already touched on it a little bit, but could you give us a little overview of your book? What's the main message?
The main message is that these kids are brilliant and not ill, right? And if we could start addressing that much earlier, that the release of all of the emotion they're carrying could, dissipate very quickly and life could happen and they're brilliant, right? It's like if you took a child who was autistic and put him in an environment where he was getting hit and raped and, all these things, and that was his life, he's going to deal with that differently than the average person. Right? Hence, that complex PTSD. And, most, highly sensitive people are very psychic and have amazing experiences. And one thing I love about Chronicles of Tigua is all the symbolism that is layered in there. The panther is the symbol of femininity and power, the rise of feminine power. And, that the brilliance of being able to shapeshift and maneuver and see beyond what the average person sees, right? And, the panther got me through a lot of things. I actually got to hold him this year.
That's really cool.
I know. Yeah, and the hummingbird, which is right on the cover, right? The hummingbird is, possibility. Right? It is amazing that we get on the other side and people claim us ill when what's real and true is these kids are amazing warriors, right? And they're brilliant because they did that. Yeah, they did that.
So I do have to ask, what inspired the idea for this book?
My life.
Your life.
And feeling so misunderstood. Yeah. And it's based on my story, right? Which,
I did not know.
Yeah, which it's, the rolling together of my out-of-body spiritual experiences, the pain and suffering that was going on, sex, violence, everything that was going on in the house, and, what opened up for me to be able to maneuver that. And it happens with a lot of kids, right? Is that nature began to talk to me, right? You know, the animals started protecting me, and that, you know, that opening, that awakening is what grown-ups are trying to achieve every day, right? These kids start out there, right? And then how do they maneuver the chaos, right?
I would also like to know, what's the symbolic importance of the title, The Chronicles of Tigua?
The Tiguan Indians, you know, that tribe of natives, I kind of traveled around, like following them, and, you know, in my spiritual experiences, my out-of-body experiences, I had a tribe of Native Americans that were always interacting and teaching me, and so the panther became Tigua, who was the bridge between here and there in that experience, right? You know, he would take me to the Tiguans, so that's kind of how that came about. Yeah, I had some amazing experiences, as do most people as they go through this. So it's cool on the other side to see how much the magic and that access, right, you know, got me and a bazillion other kids through that, right? What I would say about Chronicles is it's not a Cinderella story, right? It's not about like one little trauma that they take throughout time and then a knight in shining armor comes by and sweeps her away. That's not real. You know, this book is in screenplay form right now, and it will be a movie. And that's something I've held true to, is that we are not going to have a Cinderella story, right? These kids' experiences deserve to be validated, and you know, they deserve to be seen in a different way. And the adults need to see what we're doing. Mm-hmm.
This is not one of the interview questions, but I am curious for my own self, and you can just say no thank you if you're uncomfortable answering these questions. But did writing this book help you feel seen?
Writing this book, it was an amazing journey. First off, I had never written before. I had gotten kicked out of my writing class in school, and they told me I wasn't very good. So that being said, right, like in years, and I kept hearing, write your book, write your book. Every time there was silence, I'd hear, write your book. And I grappled with my integrity about the truth, right? Knowing that my experience wasn't everyone else's experience, yeah? So as it went on paper, sorry, I got a little sidetracked. Tell me the question again.
I asked you if writing this book helped you feel seen.
Yes. Well, it was amazing because all my perpetrators were still alive. So that being said, I kind of sat on it until now. And what it really gave me was order. You know, that's the thing for as we're coming out of something like that, time is very jumbled, right? So one of the most impactful things was getting it on paper and having an editor say, that timeline doesn't make sense, right? It was like a complete reorder or restructure of my mind and my personal history to maneuver that around to where it made sense to the outside person. Yeah, that was probably the biggest impact. My father actually passed away last year, and we're in the relaunch because I'm now ready to be seen, right? It was very difficult, like while he was still alive, to even want to sell it. Right?
I want to help you be seen, so I'm more than honored that you trust me with this. Like I'm a little emotional and honored.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate
for trusting me.
that. Yeah, it was a long journey, right? Being able to put those experiences on paper and track it, because I think one of the unique things about the way this book was laid out, and I do believe it came through me. Right? Sometimes I read it and go, wow, did I actually write that? Right? But the way it's laid out is, tracking the cycles as they went through time, from the beginning right through adulthood, and how, things would play out even through my children. Right? So.
Would you want your children to read this book? You don't have to answer.
Absolutely. They've all read it.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I think it's very important. It's on my daughter's mantle. Actually, my daughter did the cover art.
Really cool. I was going to ask that after the interview for my own personal self. Curious.
So my daughter did the cover art. She's a fashion designer and an artist. And so that they actually were very instrumental, but my entire family was through the entire process. My daughter was like, my eldest was like, I was like, I can't write it because I can't figure out how to start. And she was like, Mom, just tell it through the eyes of a child and stop trying to tell the whole story. Because it was difficult. Everybody had a different version of the story, right? And when I could sit it over here and look out of the child's eyes, I was like, whoa, what a cool kid. Objectively, she maneuvered a lot of things. My father almost killed me twice.
What is the amount of resilience that takes?
Yeah, to be able to get up and the magic that it takes and the brilliance to be able to encapsulate that in a way and get up and have breakfast with that same human being and call him daddy. That's amazing.
You said that all of your children have read this book. Who would you say is your ideal reader or your target audience? I'm really hoping to grab young moms and their children, right? They're girls and boys as they're coming through puberty. I think it's super important, right? I think it's super important for young moms to realize that it is ridiculous to trust every human with their children, right? And their children need to be taught in the same way we teach them to get behind the wheel of a car and drive 70 miles an hour, right? We need to teach them how to maneuver society and the world in a grown-up adult way, right? Humans are predators. We're mammals. The kids and these young girls need to understand what we're facing as we enter the world, right? And how to make choices, right? How to understand and make discerning choices and not to believe everything an adult says to you. Yeah? Right? Yeah, that's one thing that all children need to be taught is question everything, because knowledge is the most intense superpower you could ever have.
Yeah. And teaching our kids the right body parts, right? And the right, you don't have to hug and kiss everyone just because they want to touch you, right?
If you're uncomfortable with it, don't touch.
Don't. I love my young granddaughter. She's 6. And if I walk up, we always ask, can I have a hug? And she'll say, no, I don't want you to touch my body today. I'm like, yeah.
Air high five.
I'm like, fair enough, young lady.
Air high five, because good for you, but you don't want to be touched.
Yeah. And that you can vocalize that and feel heard. And I think that is my biggest motivation for this book. The first recognition of what was going on with our children was in 1980s. We have to recognize that. That's the first time our government had recognized that children were in danger. And any sort of thing had erupted around that. we're just now starting to recognize that most mental illness is coming from child abuse. Like, duh, right? Duh. Like, that doesn't even make sense. If you take an animal and you beat it up, that animal is going to be forever changed unless somebody does some deep rehabilitation with that animal. Yeah. And then they're still going to be different.
Yeah. Even after healing, after you break a plate, you can glue it back together, but there's still going to be a crack in the middle.
Yeah, still going to be different. Right? So that is truly, I mean, because truly, like, when the first version of this book came out and I sat on it, I actually had the writer of Pocahontas wanted to mentor me in putting in it the screenplay. And yeah, and I firstly was like, what do I do with that? Like, I don't even know the words he's saying to me, but like, I was intrigued. But then it came to that Cinderella story where they wanted me to pick one trauma and make it only about that, one perpetrator, only about that. And I was just unwilling to sacrifice them. So.
I'm glad that you didn't, because you're not telling. You didn't write this book for them. You wrote it for you. Because whether you have a target audience or not, that doesn't matter, because you wrote it for you.
Well, and my grandmother raised 52 foster kids. So as I was witnessing, and I lived with her most of the time because she about raised me too. Not most of the time, but a lot. And, so experiencing that level of violence and sex and whatever at home, and then witnessing from the outside these children, right, that were unseen and unheard and, forgotten. Like, how do we expect our world to be different? 1 in 3 children are getting violated sexually. What?
Yeah.
What?
That number alone, just knowing that in a classroom of 30 kids, a third of them.
Yeah. Right? Hardly any person you meet. Right? But are you going to find somebody that has it? Right? It's very rare. Right? And and we give a person, a grown-up, if they get sexually violated, right? It's a big deal. And a child, they'll get over it. Well, one thing that Chronicles gives us is, it paints a different picture, right? It paints a very different picture. And, it's not all bad. Nothing's ever all bad, right? And the good that is interlaced and what has risen out of that has been extraordinary, right? And, another thing he said to me was there was no heroin. And I was just appalled. The Pocahontas guy, he was like, there's, and I'm like, are you, I was just blown away, right? I'm like, why? Because she didn't go in and kill everyone, or she survived that?
That should be, it doesn't have to be Hollywood perfect for it to be Hollywood perfect.
Yeah, I mean, she got she got through that in a very powerful way. And, so, yeah, that's Chronicles. And, pay attention, because there's a lot of symbolism on every page that's very pertinent all the way through, right? Because things are so layered when you're coming out of something like that, like, so it's cool to get in there. Every time I read it, I'm like, wow, like, you know, there was so much folded in there that I didn't even recognize, right? Like I said, the book came through me. So
I'd like to know what was the hardest part of developing this book for you?
I am a truth monger, right? And it was very difficult to separate my truth from everyone else's versions of the story and not feel guilty about telling it my way, right? And, you know, I got a lot of pushback from family, for sure, for sure. No one speaks to me except for my mother. But, you know,
I'd rather not associate with my family than associate with toxicity. I really would. There is a portion of my family that I won't talk to because they are actively malicious, and I don't want that in my life or my future family's life.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny, this measurement that our world does. And, you know, I today work with people who have been through childhood trauma. That's what I do for a living. And, you know, it's my experience is not unique in any way, you know, for the family to scatter once somebody declares they've been molested, right? Because there comes in this measurement of like, you know, well, you know, was there this and did they this and did, you know, and this measurement and scale of what they're defining as a problem. And my brothers definitely had a measuring stick, right? And, you know, what I can say is on my dad's deathbed, he even said it to them, and they still have a measuring stick.
My next question is, how much has changed over the course of this book's evolution?
I would say that I was very intentional about keeping the rawness, right? Because it's through the eyes of a child. I would say that as it came out this time, I was able to round things out in a way that weren't so personal. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like the first time it was like, we need more about your dad. And, you know, I wasn't ready to do that. From a rounded perspective of saying, he was actually freaking brilliant. Right? You know, there were some amazing things about him. You know, so to be able to go through it and, you know, be free of the pain and the suffering.
The weight that goes with it.
Right. And be able to go through it and round things out. That's the beauty of this rendition.
Almost like somebody cut the ties that were holding you back.
Yeah, absolutely. My dad passing was huge, right? Because out of everyone, like, at the time, he had grown the most. He had taken ownership over everything, which
is a big deal for healing in you and him and everyone else.
Yeah. You know, I had to take a bow to him. And through that, I was like, I knew this book was going to be a movie, and I didn't want him to see it.
I can only imagine how shake up that would make you feel, because you've got it in your head that this person has hurt you. They are bad, malicious, and then they tell you, I did do those things, it was wrong, and you deserve better. It makes you feel so strange and like, wow, this closure that I have deserved.
Yeah, it was amazing because he, you know, you were able to watch him grow. And like, you know, there was a point in time he drove 6 hours to stand in my living room and say, I do understand and recognize that you kept me out of prison. You know, he understood that. Like, and so through the years, the ownership he took, right, I have to take a bow to, right? My mother as well, right? It's been different and a little difficult, but you know, I'm proud of both of them, right?
Very mature of you to be able to look at it that way, because most people would be like, I don't care. I would be like, I don't care.
I spent a lot of years there, and what I can say is we never, ever, ever stop wanting our parents.
Yeah, you know,
it never goes away. It's not intended. It's easier to cut dad than it is to cut mom. Right? We came through her. And, you know, that's a piece that I also want to be recognized in this as it becomes a movie, is that, you know, that importance of mom and how she maneuvers those things is what makes the most lasting impact. Right? You know, if you go to mom and say this is happening and she says, that's lasting impact.
Yeah, that is lasting impact, and that's the kind of things that you've got to speak up for.
Yeah, right? Is that mom's like, in this push as I work with clients through the process, it always backs up to mom. Like, where was she? Why didn't she do something? Why didn't she know? Why, right? And, you know, I have to say with my mother, I'm proud. She said at one point, she was just like, hey, it was harder for me to think about what the world might think than what you were going through. And I said, thank you. That's all I need to hear.
I can only imagine how much you needed that. Is there anything else you want to talk about or mention before I end this?
Well, I think that the world is really right now trying to decipher complex trauma, CPTSD, and recognizing that it's a thing, and recognizing dissociation is a thing, even though they don't know what it is. And, you know, this book is a visual depiction of those things. I've had psychiatrists say, oh my gosh, like, this is CPTSD right here, right, in a visual form. You know, that's probably the biggest thing, right? Is that it's like this. The kids are just dealing like with being molested, one smacked around up from the table. Like, you know, it's just one thing after the next. And what if you're highly sensitive in the first place?
And on top of that, you'll have all this abuse on top of it. But then at the end of the day, it's mommy loves you. Come give mommy a hug. And that's confusing, to say the least.
Oh, my mother used to say to me, you know, your dad loves you the most out of anybody. And I was like, what do you do with that? Well, if that's true, I don't think love is something I want.
Yeah, right? Funny way of showing it.
Well, and that becomes like how our programming is wired too, right? Like, if that's love.
I don't want anybody else to love me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's scary.
Or we duplicate that. I'm lucky I did not duplicate that, right? I'm very lucky that I did not duplicate that. So, yeah, like that's, you know, Chronicles is, it had to be time too, right? Because in the beginning, nobody could understand it. Right? But spiritually, and the awakening that our world is going through right now, I think people read it and go, oh, and can recognize themselves there. And if that's true, right, they can take ownership of it. What I'll say is I'm amazingly psychic, right? Like those gifts, quote, gifts, are what came out of that. Yeah. And when we can realize that's not mental illness, because they trapped me in those words for a really long time, and what's really true is I'm really psychic, right?
I feel like there is a lot of stigma around mental illness, so.
There's a lot of stigma, and what I find is that the brilliance that is there, because dissociation is an out-of-body experience, a flashback is astral travel or a quantum jump, right? So all these things that the world's like, you know, hammering after, these kids like know how to do it. It's just on autoresponder.
The trauma response, really.
It became a trauma response, but what's real and true is it's really brilliant. And, you know, as we work with people and they come through and start realizing that once they become an authority of that, they're quite high-level magicians.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. There's more to mental illness than just illness. It's not illness. There's more.
Yeah, there's a whole lot more. You know, and you also you think of an empath, right? A highly sensitive empath. Empaths talk all the time about absorbing, right? So what if you're an empath and somebody's beating you?
I feel like this question is like super watered down compared to all the others. But for the final question, I'd like to ask, have you ever worked with Authors Press before?
I haven't.
How has this interaction been for you so far?
This interview has been amazing. I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate your conversation and your depth.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Like, you're a really good listener.
Well, that's all the questions I have for you today. Thank you so much for meeting with me. It's been wonderful.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out to Authors Press either via our phone number or email, and we're always here.
Perfect.
This has been Cherie Doyen and Nicole Richardson. Thank you for tuning in.